Welcome to Harrier Hovering 101. Before we start, I do need to mention that this is the pre-release version that I am in. So there may be some changes and updates to the model, but the basic principles of using your nozzles and thrust to hover should remain the same. The percentages of how much energy you need, how much thrust you need may change subtly. However, the basic principles should be the same. For the sake of the tutorials and for the learning, I'm going to assume that your aircraft is fired up and ready to go. You're going to cover vertical takeoff, vertical landing, short takeoff, short landing as well. So it's not going to be a hugely long video, it's just going to give you some information to work with so you can get the best out of hovering your Harrier. Again, that's a bit of a tongue twister. First things first, you need to make sure that your weight is below or equal to the maximum weight we can take off with in vertical, which is about 21,000 pounds. It's covered in the manual as well. What I tend to do is I just fill up all my tanks except for my externals, and that's pretty good. I leave my centre of gravity where it wants to work itself out. So from the inside of the aircraft, there's a couple of things that we need to pay attention to. We will need to pay attention to our feet per minute, our airspeed, and our altitude. We can actually turn on the radar altimeter, which is down here. So that should be set to radar. It's signified by the R. This will give us a bit of a better understanding as to how high we are in relation to the ground. You will need to set a keybind to your prop RPM. This will control your nozzle position, which is indicated over here. So if I use my keybind, you'll see that the nozzles move. Excellent. So make sure these are set up first before you do anything. Then over the left-hand side, you want to make sure you turn on V-stall. You also want to make sure that your flaps are set to stall and your parking brake is off. Down here on the left-hand side. What we will do is we will hold the aircraft on the brakes and we will slowly introduce power to the engines. It will slowly start to lift off the landing gear. As it starts to lift off the landing gear, ease your power in, and then you're going to need to put some inputs either via rudder or aileron, depending on what the weather conditions are. This little thing on your nose here is very handy for indicating what's going on with the wind. The Harrier will get moved around by the wind and you will have to juggle. Not too dissimilar to a helicopter. So before we take off as well, we need to make sure we turn on our water injection system, which is down here. And I've got about 70 litres, pounds or kilos in here. So before I actually start introducing thrust, I'll actually turn that on. Okay, so what we will do now is we'll actually start doing what we need to do. So we'll introduce thrust, we'll turn on our water, we'll do a quick double check. So V-stall on, flaps are set, set to radar altimeter denoted by the R. You know the rough wind direction. So before we start, let's get the water on. So water feed is now set on, you'll see that number decreasing. And now we will gently start to introduce power. Set my nozzles to between 80 and 90 degrees, which is over here. That's about 80 to 90 degrees. Somewhere between that mark should do you good. Right, reset my view again and now slowly start introducing power. Putting on the toe brakes. Notice the nose is starting to push down. There we go, here comes the lift off the gear. And we're starting to creep up. Feet per minute's coming up. I'm going to roll my nozzles backwards so I get more of a vertical take. You have to adjust your nozzles. There we go. We go. If you have your nozzles full back, the aircraft will actually pull its tail up into the air. You're going to have a few problems. You'll be constantly juggling your nozzle position versus your amount of thrust. So the more forward your nozzle is, the more thrust you need to maintain the climb or your altitude. Now that we're going up, I'm slowly going to introduce forward nozzle position. Slowly build our speed up. Now watch my feet per minute, because my thrust is now more directed towards the rear of the aircraft as opposed to directly underneath it. And a little bit of rudder work, keep yourself on path. pick up a bit of speed, introduce more forward nozzle position, pull the nose up, try and keep that horizon nice and flat, 76 knots and increasing, more nozzle position forward, a slight little change in the flight model. I think that'll probably get changed when the aircraft is fully released, so a little bit of nose down, 150 knots increasing, a little bit more forward nozzle, 180, looking for around 200. At this point we can go slowly ease to our nozzles all the way down to 0, and then we should be in standard flight. Now that we're in standard flight, you want to turn your flaps to cruise, your H2O off, and V-stop. That may be something that will be getting updated in one version. There we go, we're up, we're in the air, done a vertical takeoff, and we've changed to standard flight. Here we are approaching our runway. We're going to go for a vertical landing. I've preemptively slowed myself down a little bit. I've turned on V-stall, I have turned on my flaps to stall, and I've turned on my radio altimeter. We do need to slow down, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give myself about 45 degrees of nozzle. And I'm going to pull the nose up a touch, just to bleed off a little bit of speed. Don't be afraid to give yourself a bit of speed brake as well. You will start to lumber a little bit. As the speed drops, slowly move your nozzles closer to the 90 degrees position. If you're at full for the aft, it will actually slow down a lot quicker, but you will need to put some thrust in to maintain some altitude. So there's 130. I'm going to drop my landing gear. Gear is down. Now that we are slowing down a touch, I'm just going to let the aircraft keep moving forward, keep an eye on my feet per minute, adjusting thrust. I will slow down a little bit too much, so I'll just give myself some forward nozzle to give me some forward momentum. Increase the power. Look at our rate of drop is massively excessive. So just feed the power in. There we go. Now ease off the power because you notice the foot per minute is now climbing, so you're always going to be juggling between nozzle position and thrust. We'll slow ourselves down. We go closer to the 100 degree mark. Bring the power down. Looking roughly where we want to land. I'm going to try and plant it in the middle of the runway. I'm keeping a little bit of forward momentum. You can do this a lot closer to the runway, but if you give yourself plenty of time to think, you might come in a little bit slower, but it gives you time to think and get used to how the aircraft handles. Give yourself plenty of time to think, plenty of time to be ahead of the aircraft, don't be chasing her. We're 42, 41 knots of forward momentum. We're doing minus 300 feet, so I'm just going to give myself a little bit more power just to arrest that now. Back it off a touch. We don't want to be going up, we still want to be going down. Give myself a little bit of forward nozzle, so that's reducing the angle of your nozzles. So the closer to 100, the more vertical you go, the lower, or the closer to 0, the more forward you go. I'm reducing throttle again, pulling the nozzle back. I'll arrest some of my speed, 500 feet per minute, not doing too bad. 37 knots. Playing with the power. Now, as you move your nozzles closer to 0, you will need to give yourself more power to maintain your altitude, because you're getting less pushed directly down from the other side of the aircraft. So that will catch you a little bit. You'll gain a little bit of altitude, you'll lose some altitude, you'll gain some. So 17 knots, nice and controlled. Light tail stroke crosswind. I'm just going to put a little bit of left stick in, a little bit of right rudder, try and line myself up with the runway. There we go. Boost the controls. So the wind is knocking us around a little bit, so it will throw you around. A bit of thrust. Don't worry if you don't necessarily get it square exactly where you want it. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of practice. But it's all about being nice and gentle. So climbing altitude. I've moved my nozzles closer to 100. So pull that down. See if we can correct where we want it to go. A little bit of right rudder, a bit of right aileron, a bit more thrust. So we're not quite where I exactly want it to be, but as I say, we're on the runway, we're nice and controlled, we're not pulling out the sky. We've gained a bit of altitude there, which is fine, so keep an eye on your feet per minute. There is a response time from the engine, but you've got to kind of anticipate it a little bit. It's moved to our left. Nice and gentle, a little bit forward nozzle, so I want to move forward a touch. Try and keep that nose level. 42 feet, 100 feet per minute. Nice and gentle, pull the nozzles closer to 100, arrest that forward momentum. Try and arrest that right hand side. Go. Bit forward nozzle. Bit back nozzle. A little bit of power, a bit of left. But you will be juggling. It's a little bit of a juggle. There you go. A little bit of power just to try and take off some of that feet per minute. And nice and gentle, kiss the tarmac, nice and down, 100 feet per minute, and we're down. Back the power off, and onto your brakes. You're down. That's how you do your vertical landing. Bearing in mind, some important things you want to note is don't be above 21,000 pounds. Give yourself plenty of time to slow down, plenty of time to get yourself in position. Don't worry if you don't get it on the dime exactly where you are. It's fairly easy to hover. It takes a little bit of time to master. So here comes the fun bit, the short takeoff. What I've done is I've put myself in V-stall here, and I've put myself into auto for my flaps over there. This is what I've done. Whether or not it's within the manual is a different story, but it sort of works for me. This is kind of the way I've learned to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my nozzle to around 40 to 50 degrees, which is down here. There's 40, there's 50, so somewhere in between there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself on the toe brakes, make sure the runway is nice and clear, altimeter is set, flaps are set, nozzles are set. And all I'm going to do is just wang the power on and scream down the runway. So let's have a go at this short takeoff. So full power, toe brakes, let it roll, and look how quick that gets off the deck. We'll have to catch it a little bit as it transitions. There's 100 knots. 135, 140, 150. When we get to about 200, that would be normal flight speed, so we can start pulling our nozzles up. Pull them up, pull them up, pull them up. Don't forget your landing gear as well, which is what I'm about to do now. I'm going to pull that up at about 150 knots, and there we go. That is your short takeoff. Now it's pretty much the reverse of that for a short stop landing as well. What I'll do is I'll just roll round here to the left, and I'll do a cunning YouTube magic cut, and then we'll do a short field landing. We'll drop my landing gear, be in V-stall. What we're going to do is we're going to use the nozzles to really help us here. I'm actually going to pull my nozzles to about 60, 70 degrees, bring the power in. Landing gear is now down. We're going to use the thrust from the nozzles so we can hopefully, all being well, stop nice and quick on this runway. We can actually afford to go a lot slower. Because we do have the thrust from the nozzle, so I'm going to have to do a lot of work with the thrust vector. We're doing about 1200 foot drop rate. I'm going to be using my nozzles as well, set to 60 degrees at the moment. I'm about halfway up the throttle at the moment, doing 138 knots. We're going to use the thrust to help maintain our altitude. I want to slow down a bit more. I'm going to push my nozzles closer to the 100 degrees mark. That will actually give me a lot more speed reduction. So I need to put some more power in as well. There we go. So look at that. We're at about 80 degrees on our nozzles. 112 knots. 500 feet per minute. There we go. There's the flaps doing what they want to do. Set a little bit. 200 foot per minute. 100 knots. 98. Using the power to maintain our altitude and keep an eye on our feet per minute. Get as close to this threshold as we can. And balancing my power. Pushing a little bit on the nose down. Try and keep my angle of attack nice. 85 knots. 500 feet per minute. 400 feet per minute. 300. Vaguely arresting. Don't really want to exceed 400 feet. Bring that power down. Flare the nose. A little bit of power again. And hopefully we'll be in well on there. There we go. And down. Takes a bit of juggling, and I don't mind showing that I don't get it perfect every time, first time. But the biggest takeaway is make sure that your weights are correct. If you want to get higher, set your nozzles closer to 100. If you want to go forward, move your nozzles closer to 0, so that will give you your forwards momentum. And if you're doing, for instance, like one of these, a short landing, set your flaps to automatic instead of V-stall. That seems to work quite nicely. For vertical takeoff, use V-stall. Make sure V-stall mode is engaged. Set your nozzles to between 80 and 90 degrees. If you keep them at 100 and leave them at full thrust, the aircraft will push its nose down and lift the tail up into the air. But hopefully that's given you some basics of how to handle the Harrier. This is just a quick nosio. When the aircraft is fully released, we'll have another deeper dive into the aircraft and we'll play with some systems as well. This is just so you have a rough idea when the Harrier is out, how you can make it hover, how you can do those lovely vertical landings, vertical takeoffs, short landings. So you can just have some fun with it. Don't worry if you don't get it right first time. I've been playing around with this for many hours now, and even I still get it wrong. So take care, stay awesome, and I shall catch you all on the next one. Bye! For those of you who made it to the end of the video, I'm going to put some text on the screen which is going to give you some helpful numbers and nozzle positions for your vertical takeoffs, your vertical landings, your short takeoffs, your short landings, and just some little settings that I found myself that work quite nicely.